Namaskar. My name is Naresh Chandrapant. I am a professor in Department of Geology, University of Delhi, and today we will be talking about electron probe microanalysis. Why do we need this kind of characterization? Electron probe microanalysis, or EPMA, represents a chemical characterization in small or micro domains. By micro domain, I mean that one is able to characterize chemically a material to the size which is micron or submicron scale. A micron means 1 by 1,000th of a millimeter can be chemically characterized. The requirement of this kind of characterization stems from the fact that the geological material is made up of minerals. Most of the minerals are impure phases and minerals constitute rocks. So, therefore, the minerals do not have fixed composition, and to understand how a particular rock formed, we need to know what are the specific compositions of minerals or how the compositions vary within a single mineral. It has very important bearing on understanding the evolution of earth, the way the rocks formed, the pressure and temperature conditions which were responsible for formation of rocks. Also, it leads to, or it provides strong data for understanding the process of mountain building and other things. This is the nature of geological material. Now, we cannot do this by normal optical microscopy. For this, we require a beam or a probe which is able to provide us the chemical information. The electron beam provide one such method, technique or probe to characterize the chemistry of the interaction area or volume. We will explain this or expound this further as we proceed. So, now for electron probe microanalysis, as the name suggests, the probe is an electron beam. When an electron beam interacts with matter, many things happen. We will not be discussing all of those things, but some of the relevant things. We can classify the kind of things which happen in two ways. One of the things which happen can be considered as elastic scattering of electrons and the other as inelastic scattering of electrons. We will be concerned with both of these. To briefly consider the elastic scattering, it refers that the incident electron beam energy is not consumed when the scattering takes place, only the direction of the electrons change. It is an important aspect for geological material because the scattering or the elastic scattering is not random. It is a function of the atomic number of the constituent material, meaning that if there is high atomic number material, there will be higher amount of scattering. If we are recording or detecting these electrons, then and producing as a gray tone image, then the higher reflected or scattered electrons will give us a brighter image. So, the gray tone difference will be able to distinguish different atomic numbers. Now, in case of minerals which are compounds, we use the concept of average atomic number for elastic scattering. By average atomic number, we mean a quantity something like sigma C I Z I. In this, I refers to the particular element we are talking about, C refers to the mass concentration of that element in that compound, and Z is the atomic number. So, if a compound is made up of 5 elements, then the individual proportion of concentration of those 5 elements multiplied by their atomic number and summed will give us the average atomic number of a compound. For example, if there is quartz, there is potash feldspar and magnetite, they will produce different average atomic number, and therefore, they will be reflected in elastic scattering as different gray tone images. In the image which you see here, it is the backscattered electron image of a feldspar, which has 3 main components. You see here that one of the component shows high amount of Celsian or baryon feldspar. The other component is high amount of potassium or orthoclase feldspar, and the third is high amount of anorthite or albite or sodium feldspar. Now, all these 3 come out as different gray tone images within one single mineral, suggesting that at one point of time this feldspar was a solid solution of these 3 components. In electron microprobe analysis, however, the main beam matter interaction with which we are concerned is inelastic scattering. Now, it occurs in a very complex way, but we will try to understand it in a simplified manner. When an electron interacts at some stage, its incident electron energy, which is generally expressed as electron volts or kilo electron volts, assumes a value 0. In the interim, that is when it interacts with the matter and up to the incident electron energy, when it becomes 0, it goes through several events. If the incident electron has high enough energy, then what it does is that it knocks out an electron from the area or volume with which it is interacting. We will see that it is actually a volume with which it interacts. When the electron is knocked out, it is replaced by another electron from another orbital, and in the process of this replacement or filling of the electron hole vacancy, certain amount of energy is released, because there is law of conservation of energy, that overall energy has to be preserved. Now, the released energy is in the bandwidth of X-rays, and that is what allows us to understand and quantify the amount of element present. However, this gets complicated by a factor that other than this electron hole creation and filling and release of energy, this energy is called as characteristic X-ray. And what it means is that there is a particular wavelength X-ray or particular energy X-ray, because the two are related, in such a way that they signify one particular energy level transition. Now, in most cases these transitions are inner shell transitions, which means what is that the electron holes are created in the inner shells like K within the KL or M, and the electron which fills these vacancies comes from the outer orbitals, which means that the difference between these two will give us the amount of energy which is going to be released, and equivalent to that energy will be the wavelength. In this released energy, we can either measure it as energy or as wavelength, because as we know the electromagnetic particles have dual property. Other than the characteristic X-ray, there is also another X-ray which is released, and that X-ray is called as continuum or background, or a German word Bremsstrahlung. Now, this German word has meaning of breaking radiation. It refers to the deacceleration of electrons, which means what? That if we look at a simplified picture of an atom where there is a nucleus and an area up to which the Coulombic field of the nucleus extends, or which defines the atomic radii, then an electron impinging on the nucleus will instantly lose all its energy, and an electron away from this will lose less of its energy, but some amount of energy. Electron passing through outside the Coulombic field of the atom will not lose any energy and will go down, interact with another atom, and thereafter it will lose energy. So, there will be a loss of energy from nearly all of the incident electron beam to 0, which means there will be a continuum of X-rays produced, since there are so many millions of electrons which are coming through. So, that continuum of energy will be present all through, and this will represent the background. For a particular characteristic X-ray, we may have at a particular energy or wavelength position certain amount of X-rays, but if we do not know the background, then we will be overestimating the amount of characteristic X-rays. So, therefore, we have to know both the characteristic X-ray intensity as well as the background beneath a particular characteristic X-ray to actually quantify or measure a particular element in terms of a particular inner shell transition. Now, let us look at some of these inner shell energy level transitions. When an electron hole is created, let us say in an electron which is orbiting within K shell, then if it is filled by an electron from the subsequent shell, that is L shell, then the movement of the electron is from L to K. The tradition of naming the X-ray is where the electron hole vacancy is created. So, therefore, supposing it is for element iron, we will write it as FeK. If this transition or this electron hole is filled by L shell, then it will be named as FeK alpha X-ray. If it is filled by next, that is M shell, then it will be named as FeK beta X-ray. If it is filled by the subsequent shell, then it will be termed as FeK gamma X-ray. In this system of nomenclature, there are numerous X-rays which are produced. For example, all the X-rays which are narrated by creation of vacancy in K shell represent a family of X-rays, that is the K series X-rays. A certain amount of energy will be required to produce K series X-rays. Now, the energy which is required to produce K series X-rays is called as EC, or critical excitation energy or critical excitation potential. So, EC represents for one family of X-rays the amount of energy which is required to produce. Similarly, if there is an electron hole vacancy created in L shell and is filled by M shell, it will not be filled by K shell because the energy of K shell is less than that of the L shell. If it is filled by M shell, then following the same procedure of naming, these X-rays will be named as FEL series X-rays. If it is filled by M to L transition, they will be FEL alpha. If it is filled by N to L transition, FEL beta, and so forth. So, one sees that there are numerous or a large amount of X-rays which will be produced by a small amount of incident electron beam, only a small proportion of incident electron beam, and this will happen if there are 10 elements present, will happen in all those 10 elements. All those X-rays will be generated, and if we try to look at the number of X-rays which will be produced and their nomenclature, we can look at this diagram. It is also important to notice that the maximum amount of energy for any element required is for the K series X-rays. As an example, for iron K alpha series X-rays, the EC or the critical excitation energy is 7.11 kilo electron volt, whereas for the same element, the L series X-rays, the critical excitation EC is 0.71 electron volt. So, therefore, if the K series X-rays of an element are being produced, they will lead to generation of simultaneously L series and M series X-rays. It is important to know the relationship between the energy and the wavelength. The energy in terms of electron volt, remember energy in terms of electron volt, the incident beam energy is in terms of electron volt, electron kilovolt. The energy of the X-ray in terms of electron volt is related by Duane-Hunt equation of this type. This in electron volt is equal to, whereas the lambda or the wavelength is in the units of nanometer. So, as you can see, this relationship tells us that there is an inverse relationship between energy and wavelength, which means that shorter or lower nanometer wavelength will have high energy. The shorter wavelengths will have high energy and the longer wavelengths will have lower energy. We will now proceed to the method of measurement, quantification and other details of electron probe microanalysis. The characteristic X-rays generated range in wavelength from 0.1 to 100 angstrom. Amongst these, 50 to 100 angstrom X-rays or the longer wavelength X-rays are known as soft X-rays, whereas the shorter wavelength X-rays are known as hard X-rays. Now, we can, as you know, we can understand, we can measure them either as energies or wavelengths or in terms of their wave character. If we are measuring the element intensities in terms of energies, that is known as energy dispersive spectrometry or EDS. And if we are measuring them in terms of wavelengths, then that is known as wave dispersive spectrometry or WDS. An electron probe microanalyzer is essentially a wavelength dispersive spectrometer. The reason why a wavelength dispersive spectrometer is a better or more accurate analytical tool can be explained by a figure, wherein we see in this figure the horizontal axis represents the energy of X-rays. So, this is the energy of X-rays. This could also have been, by following the relationship of Duane-Hunt, could also have been wavelengths, and the vertical axis represents the resolution. In this resolution, because this is in terms of energy, is also in terms of energy. So, if one is measuring, this is around 100 electron volt, if one is measuring a quantity of an element using EDS, the resolution graph for different X-rays will be of this nature. Whereas, if one is measuring or using wavelength dispersive spectrometry, then one requires different diffracting crystals, and those diffracting crystals can be named as I will explain what these are, and these, as you can see here, can resolve the energy differences between different X-rays to the tune of few electron volts or few tens of electron volts. You can see this explained in the diagram in the text also. Now, what are these diffracting crystals is given in this table. Since there is a range of energies or a range of wavelength which is to be measured, one diffracting crystal is not sufficient. That is why we have seen there are several possible crystals. In cases of some of the energies or some of the elements, more than one crystal overlaps, which means that an element can be measured using one diffraction, two different kind of diffracting crystals. Which to choose? The decision is based on higher resolution achieved by a particular crystal. That can be illustrated by an example like this, where we have silicon being measured, silicon K alpha X-rays being measured by two different crystals, one TAP, the other PET, listed in that table. If you see in the diagram also, the element characteristic peak of the two are similar. However, if you look at the vertical axis, the intensity in case of the TAP crystal goes to 4000, whereas in the case of PET it is of the order of 200, which suggests that there is a much higher intensity of X-rays which can be measured using TAP crystal. So, therefore, TAP crystal is a better choice. The method to do this is that the peak width is measured at full width half maximum, full width half maximum or FWHM, and whichever gives higher resolution, that crystal is selected. So, we make a careful selection choice of particular diffracting crystal. Why do we do this? Is that in a WDS or wavelength dispersive spectrometry, sample is placed at a particular point, let us say unchanged point, the incident electron beam falls on this and it generates characteristic X-rays. For a particular characteristic X-ray, we fix a diffracting crystal at the energy or wavelength position of that particular X-ray, and that is directed to a detector. The nature of detector is such that there are two kinds of detector. The common detector is known as gas proportion flow counter, which is a tube like device, like this, where there is a window where these X-rays are directed. Then there is a center wire which is provided with a positive bias or voltage, generally of the order between 1200 to 1800 volts. The X-rays ionize the gas which is present there. The gas is around 90% pure argon and 10% methane, ultra pure methane. The gas gets energized or ionized, and because of the positive bias in the central wire, the flow of electrons, that is the negative charge, takes place towards the central wire, and the electrical impulse determines the intensity or quantity of the material. This exercise is first repeated with a known composition or standard, and the amount of X-rays collected in standard is calibrated, and the amount of unknown or from the sample which is to be measured are compared with the calibrated X-rays of the known composition, and this comparison allows us to provide a very accurate determination of the quantity of the material. Castaing in 1958 in his PhD thesis was first to do this conversion of the intensity of X-rays into concentration, and he used this as a formula. So, he defined something like K ratio, which is intensity of X-rays in unknown divided by intensity of X-rays in standard, and he called the first approximation of composition as when he multiplied this by the concentration in standard. However, this is not sufficient. Why? Because when an X-ray is produced, there are other effects which we have not discussed in this class, which are there. What are those other effects? That some of the X-rays which are characteristic for a particular element are absorbed within the other elements. So, there is an absorption effect. Then the amount of X-rays which are returned or elastically scattered back will lead to a lesser, if there is higher scattering, then there will be lesser amount of X-rays. So, there is an atomic number dependent correction, that is, if there are two elements present, one with the accompanying lower atomic number, the other with higher atomic number, the one with lower atomic number will have higher amount of X-rays for a particular element, whereas one with higher atomic number accompanying element would have scattered back more of the X-rays. So, there is a atomic number dependent correction which need to be carried out to this. There is a third kind of correction, which is when the X-rays are produced, if they are of high enough energy, they can knock off another electron and produce a secondary X-ray effect. That phenomena is called as fluorescence. So, that fluorescence correction is also to be carried out. If we can abbreviate this, they appear as a popular mode of correction called as ZAF or ZAF, atomic number absorption fluorescence correction. However, there have been subsequently mode development which have developed better correction models, which are required essentially for the low atomic number or LAN kind of elements. There have been significant amount of progress, but with the kind of progress which has taken place, one can now successfully and repetitively measure few tens of parts per million of a particular trace element even. Now, this has revolutionized one particular application which is called as chemical geochronology, which assumes that in a particular portion in a mineral, the amount of radiogenic daughter product is directly proportional, is the only daughter product and is directly proportional to the decay of the radioactive parent. And that has led to extensive use of in situ chemical geochronology, especially used for monazite dating. That has allowed in situ non-destructive determination of geological events, which is especially used in older mountain building activities, in older magmatic emplacement studies, and also in the diffusion related processes. So, the present day modern application of electron probe microanalysis has found utility in every field. So, we see that electron probe microanalysis is a rapid, in situ, non-destructive technique of chemical characterization, wherein 1 micron or even less than 1 micron domains can be analyzed to an accuracy which can be of the few tens of parts per million values. So, the trace element and major element analysis can be accurately carried out. It has wide ranging applications in all fields of geology, including that of economic activity of identifying potential source, potential gangue versus metal relationship, and it has future applications as the technique develops further. Thank you.